pleasure to participate in any way I can and work with TiE. I have a lot of respect for TiE. I love the mission. Like my hero Charlie Munger says, that a place like Costco has done a lot more good in the world than even the Rockefeller Foundation. And the reason he says that, if you really dissect that statement, is entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship is really what makes the wheel turn. And it's really what leads to what is eventually a lot of good for society, from jobs to growth and everything. And it all starts with an entrepreneur dreaming an impossible dream. And since that is at the essence of what TiE cares about and TiE focuses on, it's easy to love TiE. So that's great. What I'm going to do today is hopefully I have some thoughts I'd like to share with you. And hopefully we'll have time to hear from you and maybe get your questions and comments and such on the subject at hand. So we're going to talk about something I usually don't talk about, which is sales and marketing. And like many of you in the room, I'm an engineer, and I trained as an engineer. And when I went through undergraduate as an engineer, I looked at these marketing majors with a jaundiced eye. And basically my take at the time was that this is all fluffy stuff and it's really easy stuff, and these guys aren't really doing the real hard work like real men do engineering, and all those sorts of kind of perspectives. And very early, in my early 20s, I happened to read a book, and I'll mention a few books today, and I have actually a list I'll hand out, so you don't need to write down the names of the books I'm mentioning. I'll give it to you all on a piece of paper if you care to go through some of them. This would have been like mid-80s, and I read a book called Marketing High Technology by this guy called William Davidow, and he's now a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, very prominent firm, more Davidow Ventures. But at that time, he was originally head of R&D at Intel, and then they had moved him from head of R&D to head of marketing at Intel. And he wrote this book after he had done a few years of running marketing for Intel. And there's a couple of things he mentioned in the book that really stood out for me. And one of the first things he said was that marketing is an exact science. And it is almost as exact a science as physics. And obviously that destroyed a lot of kind of preconceived notions I had about the way I thought about marketing. And then he went about talking about what he called the laws of marketing, which in many ways he thinks of as the laws of physics. So just to take a step back, and this is 101, marketing and sales are two completely different things. And I'll talk about sales a little later on, but first I want to talk about marketing, and then we'll dovetail into sales. And of course, there is some overlap, but I think of them as very different endeavors. And so I was intrigued with the way Davidow was talking about these laws of marketing. For example, one of his laws was that if you look at any market, any product, any market, there will typically be 3 or 4 players at the most that control 80% of that market. And it could be making airplanes, or it could be making hair clips. You can pretty much go across the board. It could be making software, anything you want. And I found that stunning. And if you invert that, so one of my heroes, Charlie Munger, says every time you encounter something, always invert the logic to try to get some other place. So if you invert that principle, first of all, if you agree with the principle, then the inversion would be that if you're starting a business and you say that this is a $10 billion market and I just need 10% of it and I'll be a $1 billion company, right there you're off. Because the inversion would be that if you're going after a market, your approach has to be, how do I get 60% of that market? And so if your starting point is that I'm going to take 2% of this market or 5% of this market, what you have not done is you have not segmented that market properly. And that is a fatal flaw. So the first thing you ought to do is define the market that you're going after. And after you've defined it, if you don't get to very clear-cut game plan to get 50, 60% market share, then don't even try. Because either you have not done your job correctly or you don't have anything to offer that is going to be that compelling to people. So this is one example of what Davidow was talking about. And then I read actually a set of 3 books written by the same authors. And the funny thing about these books is all my marketing lessons, which I still use today, were all from these books in the 70s and 80s. And I'm sure there's a bunch of newer ones now, but I don't have those names to share with you because I'm locked into these core principles. But another set of 3 books was written by these 2 guys, Miller and Hyman. And so the names of those books were Strategic Selling, Conceptual Selling, and Successful Large Account Management. And of course, even though the term selling is in those books, a large part of it has to do with marketing, not so much about selling. I'll get to selling later. So between Davidow and these Miller Hyman books, I got a very solid education that marketing is not fluff. It's really a set of very core rules. And if you violate those rules, that would be like a physicist who claims that there's no gravity. So the physicist can claim there's no gravity, but gravity is going to affect him. Okay, so you can think that there's no gravity or it works a certain way or it works in reverse, but all of those things are going to come bite you. So you really cannot ignore these core rules of marketing. And if you don't want to ignore them, you at least have to know them, right? It's hard to ignore something if you don't even know what it is. So you have to know these rules. And I would say probably 95% of entrepreneurs who get going do not understand these rules, and therefore the result is predictable. They're going to hit a brick wall pretty soon and such. The rules are very important. The second is that the stronger the marketing, the weaker the sales engine can be. Okay, I do not consider myself a good salesman. I consider myself a poor salesman. I consider myself a pretty strong marketing person. And so if you have done your marketing homework, you can be a leper and make sales. And a standing example of that is someone in front of you, because basically my approach to sales would be 180 degrees approach to your traditional used car salesman schmoozing model and golf courses and all that. None of that is of much interest to me. So the stronger the marketing, the less important the sales engine becomes. So it is very important, in my opinion, to spend incredible amounts of time on the marketing aspect of the business. Because if you don't spend that time on that aspect of it, you will spend 50x that time on the sales end and hit your head against a brick wall. And that's no fun. It's not fun to hit your head against a brick wall. So it's good not to go there. So I just feel the stronger the marketing, the weaker the sales. Now, the other aspect is that most things that people come up with that they want to pitch to the world, some basic rules. Charlie Munger's rule: do not try to sell something that you wouldn't buy yourself. Okay? So if you don't truly think it's something that you would yourself be a customer of, don't try to pitch it. Don't be a used car salesman. So please make sure that whatever you're trying to come up with is compelling enough that you would yourself be deeply interested in buying that product. About, I would say 16 or 17 years ago, I read a book called Power versus Force. It was written by this guy, David Hawkins. And when I've referred this book to friends of mine, I get 2 kinds of reactions. Either they are ready to throw it back at me on my face and hope it really hurts me, or they love the book. Okay, I don't have people in the middle who say, it was okay. I never get that. I get extreme reactions. And I'm sure when you read the book, if you decide to read it, you'll have either one reaction where you'll embrace it, or another reaction saying, this is such a bunch of nonsense. Okay, so please bear with me and just dive in and accept it. Okay, so David Hawkins is not a marketing guy. He's a new age guru who hangs out in one of these new age places in Arizona with a ponytail and all. And it's actually a somewhat spiritual book. And his thesis on that book is that if I lie to you and in your conscious state, you do not know that I'm lying to you, in your subconscious, you do. And for most humans, for all humans, there's a pipe, a communications highway, or at least a 1-lane highway that is going between your subconscious and your conscious. And because of all the gunk the world throws at us as we are growing up, for most of us humans, that pipe is almost completely clogged. Okay? So whatever your subconscious is trying to send as a message to you, to your conscious brain, is barely able to get through. And usually it gets through in some mumbled, jumbled way. There are certain humans for whom that pipe is less clogged than others. And the less the clogging that you have, the better judge of human nature and better judge of the world you're going to be. I believe that people like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have significantly less clogged pipes than most of the rest of us. I believe someone like Gandhi had almost a completely unclogged pipe and such. So what David Hawkins said is that most of us, if someone's lying to you at the subconscious level, this guy is just feeding me a line. Okay? And when your subconscious is trying to transmit that message to the conscious part to tell you, get away from this idiot, it can't get through. Okay? But what happens is a little bit of the signal for most of us does get through. And the little bit of the signal, what it's telling you is you somehow feel that you don't feel that good being around that person. Okay? You may not know why you don't feel good about being around that person. And like, for example, the classic used car salesman. You really don't crave to be around that person. And you can't pinpoint which part of his pitch is a lie, but you generally don't want to be around that. Okay? And if you invert it, which is what Hawkins does, which is if someone is absolutely truthful to you all the time, you want to be as close to that person as much of the time as you can. And so Hawkins came up with what he calls these attractor fields. And he put a bunch of math in the book as well, putting like a log scale on different attractor fields, which is probably where I lose some of my rational friends when they read the book. So what he said is that humans have different levels of attractor fields that they emit. Okay? The more truthful you are, the stronger those attractor fields. The more slimy used car salesman you are, then you're just like repelling people. They don't want to be around you. And you're trying to chase them down and get them around you. And so, for example, he put someone like Jesus right at the absolute top of the attractor fields, absolute truth. He put Gandhi, I think, probably one whole log level down below Jesus. And then he put all kinds of the other great people, Martin Luther King and others, up there. Warren Buffett, probably he's a capitalist, so he's not quite like Gandhi, but he'd be somewhere up there, right? You have to give a discount to capitalists and such. But basically, he'd be up there. That's why people want to. And that's why there's 40,000 people who show up in Omaha every year, because it's those attractor fields at work. And so these attractor fields work. But Hawkins went further. And what he said is that if I lie to you, okay, and we put these kinesiology sensors on you, not on me, on you, that sensor is going to pick up changes in your muscles, which your subconscious is feeding into, which will basically say you're being lied to. Okay? I don't know. I've never tested that. I don't know whether that part of his thesis works or not. Probably another reason why I lose my rational friends. But let's assume whether it works or not. Bottom line is, if I lie to you, just leave it at that. Your subconscious knows, and that's the end of it. Now, what happens is that when you take that in the context of marketing, which is where I overlaid this, and in fact, a great example of, I'm pretty sure the people at Procter & Gamble have never read Hawkins because the company predates Hawkins. But P&G has a principle. They have a principle that they will never market anything unless whatever they are saying is true and it is genuinely an improvement. So whatever they're pitching has to be true. What P&G has found, probably over 100 years of history of marketing, everything, and they're the gods of marketing, is you cannot, in effect, put lipstick on a pig. Okay? So if you have a substandard product and dress it up, what happens is the human attractor field just sees straight through that. And those products don't do well. Okay? So what P&G has found is that if you're pitching some kind of detergent that is better than other detergents, it better be better. Okay? Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And so the attractor field, I would say that someone like P&G really understands that at the core. And I think they may not realize it, but they really are playing off Hawkins. So when you look at this in the context of our discussion today, which is on marketing, Number one, please don't go out to the world with anything that is not earth shattering. Okay? So if you don't have a compelling value proposition, there is no point pitching that, because it's going to fall flat, because it's going to fail that getting 60% market share, right? So first of all, whatever product or service you're coming out with has to have a compelling value proposition. And whatever that value proposition is has to be real and truthful. So you can't just fake it and say, oh, this is what we do, and have some glitzy marketing message around it. It will, in the end, fail. So very important, I think, to keep the Hawkins message in mind and keep it absolutely truthful. And it is not easy to come up with compelling things that the world needs. That's not an easy exercise. But like Munger says, why should it be easy to get rich? So if it is not easy to come up with these things, no problem. Just spend more time at the drawing board, and eventually you'll figure it out. Now, let's say you have come up with a compelling value proposition. Let's say you are absolutely truthful, you truly understand it, and your pitch is truthful and all of that. What I have found is that basically you come up with, and you've come up with it in your lab and thinking about it, talk to a few friends, looks great. It's the service or product looks great. The real litmus test of that is when you put it in front of customers, right? So when you go out and make your pitch or create an ad or whatever else, and a very important thing for an entrepreneur to do is when they put that out there, pay a lot of close attention to the feedback you get from the people who are listening to the pitch. And this is very important at the front end, because what is probably the case is that whatever you came up with is off base. It's not exactly what your market wants. And I'll give you an example. There's a friend of mine in Chicago, and he started this company called Install Shield. And many of you might be familiar with the company. When you're installing different Windows products, Install Shield comes up. And Viresh basically was like, I think, 19 years old or something when he came up with Install Shield. And he said he went to a trade show. He was going to go to a trade show, some software tools trade show. And he was trying to do a whole bunch of different things. He was trying to do Google Maps 30 years ago, when there was no way that the computing could support that sort of thing. But he went to this trade show, and he had created this kind of trade show booth with the different products. And he had 7 products, 7 different tools that he was pitching. And it wasn't balancing on that booth, because he wanted to put 4 bullets on one side and 4 bullets on the other. And he was like 4 and 3. So he was like, it was really bothering him. And so as an afterthought, this little tool he had, which was to install software, for installing software, was his 8th bullet. He just put that in the end. At the bottom, the 8th bullet was install software installation tool. And throughout the whole week I think a couple of days he was at this trade show booth, and all these people are coming by and all this stuff going on. And there was a guy across the aisle from him who spent 2 days looking at those 8 things, because he was in the software business. And after 2 days, he came up to him and said, that product, I have an interest in that product. And this product did not exist. It was in Viresh's mind. And so this was one of the only leads he picked up at the show. So he went back and created the product and gave it to the guy. And then he found that other people wanted it, and so on and so forth. Okay, so bottom line is that if you study startups, you will find over and over that what actually works is not what you actually came up with. What actually works is like some tangent or some kind of, you mention something to a customer in passing, and then they grab onto that and say, hey, I want that. And you say, oh, he's unusual, he wants the unusual thing, I'll still keep my core pitch. No, what you really have to do is pay really close attention to what is going on. And I'll give you an example of that, which I just encountered a few hours ago. So I am in the process of raising a fund. It's just going to finish in 2 days, but I'm in the process of raising a fund to basically buy an insurance company. And anyway, it was the first time in my life that I had to raise like about 150 million in a short period of time, about 6 weeks. I've never done that before. And I didn't know whether I could do it or not. And it looks like we'll be oversubscribed, which is great. And the best part of the oversubscription is I never left Irvine, and the investors are from all over the world. And because I told you, I'm like the leper in terms of sales. I just wanted to make sure my marketing was done right, and then everything else works. So I was looking today at the list of investors who have committed to coming into this venture. And what surprised me was that 50% of that list is Indians from all over the place. Okay, now Indians make up what, 2%? 2%, right? They make up 2% of the country. And statistically, we would not expect that 2% of the country is becoming 50% of my fund. When I actually did not pitch it, I did not pitch it specifically to Indians. I just pitched it across the board. Now, if I was really good about the marketing engine, what I would understand is the next time I'm doing this, to pay more attention to that, right? To pay more attention to that demographic and to hone a message that's honed into that demographic somewhat more, because clearly I'm tapping into something which is statistically significant. And so these are the things you've got to pay attention to, which is that you are not going to have the right idea to start with. Your idea may be 70% right or 60% right or 10% right. But if you listen carefully to what your customers say, you'll be able to adjust it. So a very good book on this front is a book called The Origin and Evolution of New Businesses. It's written by IIT grad and Harvard Business School grad Amar Bhide, and I've become actually friends with Amar since I read the book. And so what Amar did is, he's a professor now at Columbia, I think. He spent about 10 years, not 10 years, he spent a few years interviewing Inc. 500 CEOs. And the Inc. 500 list comes out every year. It's the list of 500 fastest growing private companies in the US. So what he did is, his perspective was that business schools spend a lot of time studying large businesses. They do not spend time studying entrepreneurship. And his perspective was, I really want to understand how and what goes on at the formation of a company. And so he said, why don't I talk to these Inc. 500 CEOs, ask them a bunch of questions, interview them, and see from an academic point of view if there are common themes that emerge from all these discussions, which can serve as a blueprint of what are great things to do and not to do when you start. And so I think that's a fantastic book to read, because there's incredible research that went in, but it's also a very funny book. And there are incredible commonality amongst these diverse range of investors in completely different industries who did this exact same thing. So for example, one thing I did in my first business when I started TransTech is I had two business cards. One of my business cards said president and CEO, which I never used. My second business card said vice president marketing. It's the only card I used. Okay. And I was at that time pitching IT services to basically, you would say, companies north of 500 million or a billion in sales, large businesses. Many times they were Fortune 500 companies. So when I went to meet these companies, my thinking was that if I say I'm the president CEO, it makes the company look small, right? If I say vice president marketing, they'll say, oh, he looks pretty impressive and he must work for some impressive people and must be a kind of large organization and that sort of thing. And the funny thing is, when I read Amar's book, half the entrepreneurs did that. Okay. And I did that because it just made logical sense to me. A lot of the entrepreneurs did that. The other thing they did was they put international in the names of the companies. They put global in the names of the companies. They put all these different things in the names of the companies to make it look larger, right? All these things to make it look larger. And so these people had not talked to each other to come up with it. They had come up with it independently. And what I found interesting, the way when Amar did the analysis, is now you could, when you were starting a business, you could read the book, look at this list of things that all these guys did and try to incorporate those, because those worked. All those guys were successful and they built large businesses. And the other thing that comes up, which is outside the subject of the discussion we're having today, is they were basically arbitrage players. And so what I mean by arbitrage players is that I just told you that don't go out till you have a compelling value proposition. Compelling value propositions, let me rephrase that. Enduring compelling value propositions, like for example, the iPhone. We're not going to come up with that. I'm sorry, folks. Maybe one or two of you can, but I certainly can't. And most of you probably can't either. So hard to come up with enduring competitive value propositions that are just earth-shattering, right? But arbitrage-oriented value proposition. So to give you an example, one of the entrepreneurs that Amar interviewed had started this company called CompuLink in Florida. So this guy had finished high school. He went into the army. The army trained him in being like a communications tech, basically doing all this communications gear. And after 2 years, he had enough of the army and the buzz cuts and all that, and he quit. And he didn't have much money. He had a very small studio apartment in Florida, and he's trying to figure out what to do. And in his apartment, the way it was set up, there was a long distance between his computer and his printer, about 20 feet. So he needed a really long cable between the computer and printer. So he went to the local computer store. And again, this is probably early 80s, no internet, nothing. He went to the local store, computer store, and basically said, hey, I'm looking for such and such type of cable at this length. And at that time, these cables were not standardized, right? So every vendor was doing its own cables and own proprietary stuff. So you had to get exactly that printer and that computer connecting and all that. The computer store owner told him, look, I don't have that kind of cable. I get these requests all the time, but I can tell you that you can just daisy chain 6 of these, and that'll get you your 20 feet, and it's more expensive, but you can do that. So this guy in the army knew how to make cables. That's one of the things he had picked up. So he flipped the question to the store owner. He says, hey, look, what if somebody gave you all these missing lengths of cables that you don't have, and you just sell them because what you're proposing to me is so expensive and ridiculous that makes no sense. So the guy said, look, I want branded stuff. I don't want some mishmash stuff. So then the guy said, would you put it on sale on consignment? So he said, oh, on consignment, you mean you're going to put your inventory in my store? He said, yeah, sure, no problem, put it there. So he made a kind of a matrix of all the different interfaces and all the missing cable lengths. And then he went to work in his apartment and made these cables. And then he put it in the store. And then he went to talk to all the other computer store owners up and down the coast of Florida and had all these stores carrying his cables. And he had supernormal profits because the pricing was set to be slightly less than this daisy chain thing. But what would happen is that after about a few months, the manufacturer or some branded cable guy would come up with that cable length, better packaging, better brand. And then the store owner would say, I don't need this anymore. Okay, take your riffraff out of here. So he was making supernormal profits, but he made it for a short time. So he had a competitive advantage, but it was not enduring. But what he did is he was nimbler than everybody else because he was small. He continuously kept track of what is coming out, what interfaces are coming out, what lengths are missing, and he just stayed one step ahead and just continued to come up with products just 3-4 months before the rest of the guys caught up with him. And then finally that business evolved to the point where he went from making cables to installing large-scale cable installations for Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. And now that business has 100 people. Okay, so that was a case of not an enduring competitive advantage, just hopping from one to the other till finally he found a services piece, and then the services piece worked, and he scaled the services piece and such. Anyway, I think Amar's book is fantastic on that front. So what you really have to do is keep your ear very close to the ground and really listen, especially in the early days, really listen to what your customers are saying, because they will basically tell you exactly the way you need to point the company. And if you don't listen to them tone deaf, then again, you're going to hit your head against a brick wall. So I want to talk about another, Charlie Munger calls these mental models. I'll talk about another model, which is not, it's more broader than just marketing, but I think it applies very much to marketing. There was this management guru who was at McKinsey in the 70s and 80s, Tom Peters, and he wrote a bunch of best-selling books. If you're my age, you probably have read some of these books, In Search of Excellence, A Passion for Excellence, and so on. He was like the Jim Collins of the 70s and 80s. Wonderful writer, did a lot of good work on looking at different companies, large companies, and why they did well and so on. And I remember in one of the Tom Peters books, he gave a story. And I really found this story really hard to believe. I said, this cannot be the way the world works. So what Tom said is that, and he said this was a true story, he said that there were these 2 gas stations at this busy intersection in California. And they were both self-serve gas stations. And at that time, for those of you who are older than the time when you just put your credit card in and out of the machine, you had to actually go into the store to pay, if you remember that. One of the owners of the gas station would come out every hour and a half pick a random car and tell the guy, listen, sit in the car, I'll give you a full serve. So you would pump the gas, clean the windshield, check the oil, just do everything, and at no charge, right? And the guy across the street could clearly see what is going on. And his perspective was that this is stupid. It's self-serve. Why do you want to give full serve on self-serve? Because you're never going to make the money on that. And you can't do it for everyone. What's the point of doing this for this random people? Because the other people are not getting serviced. Over time, what started happening is the guy who was providing the extra service once in a while was getting more business. More cars were going to his gas station, which is the guy across the street. And even after the guy across the street saw a drop in business, and it was clearly visible to him why his business has dropped, he did not make a change to his modus operandi. And then Tom Peters says that you can sit down with your most direct competitors and you can lay out all your competitive advantages and your hidden trade secrets and everything. Just lay it all out. And they will listen to you. They might be intrigued, but there will be no behavior change. Okay? So I said, this is ridiculous. How can this be true? How can you, in a capitalist society, when someone is showing you something that would make you more money and more successful, you choose to ignore it? And again, I was in my mid-20s when this happened. I had actually started my IT services business at the time. And so I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prove Tom Peters wrong, right? And I'm going to prove Tom Peters wrong in two different ways. The first way I'm going to prove him wrong is I'm going to copy anything from anyone that I find is interesting and sensible, even if every bone in my body is fighting that for whatever reason that Tom is talking about. Okay, so I said, first of all, I'm going to clone good practices and good ideas wherever I see them. And the second is I'm going to test it in the real world if this is exactly how people act. In the IT business, the industry at that time was growing so fast that we had lots of turnover. We had lots of young, ambitious kids working for us. And they used to get job offers all the time, 20, 30% raises and all these things. And many of them wanted to set up their own IT business and compete with us and so on. So very often, someone would come into my office, look at their shoes, and turn in their resignation. Okay. And then when I asked him what he was going to do, usually, again, looking at the shoes, he would basically say, I'm going to compete with you. Okay. And at that point, I felt, and this is something I've always felt right from the time I heard about Bill Davidow. For me, marketing and all these things are all about really an academic pursuit. The fact that we make money and all that is just a side effect. So I was into this pursuit of proving Tom Peters wrong. I did not really care about any negative impacts on the business or cash flows or anything. So I said, that's great. If you're going to business competing with us, is there anything I can do to help you? I said, if you want to sit down, I can lay out all my trade secrets. Okay. And so these guys first of all thought that I was either kidding with them or lost my mind or whatever else, and I'm not getting angry or anything. So I said, no, please sit down. And I explained every possible thing I could about the way I went about getting clients, segmenting, finding the business, all these different things, right? And then I sit back and observe when they set up their business, what and how they were proceeding. Not one of them followed anything I told them. Okay. And I said, my God, Tom Peters is so, and that's just stunning to me. Because I wasn't bullshitting them. I was actually laying out everything, black and white, everything down. And maybe they didn't trust me. I don't know. Okay. But it was pretty apparent that what I was telling them was maybe that the power versus force, they should have known from the subconscious there was no bullshit coming to them. Okay. But maybe the pipeline was completely clogged. Who knows? But they never did. None of them followed anything I told them. Okay. And so I discovered that basically there's a small portion of humans who have this cloning gene, who are willing to basically say, I am stupid, the rest of the world is smarter than me, I will learn from the rest of the world. Because to really be a cloner, what I've understood is it's an exercise in humility, right? Because you're basically saying everyone else is better than me. And I have no problem admitting everyone else is better than me, because they are. And also because I'm a shameless cloner. what's wrong with cloning when no one else does? So what I found that cloning is incredibly powerful because so few people are willing to do it, right? They're just not willing to go there. And so there's a number of facets to cloning. Okay, so what I try to do is anytime I saw people in the industry or outside the industry do anything that impressed me or made me look up and say, oh, that's something good and all that. I remember, like, for example, one time I got a letter from my law firm in this big brown manila envelope, and the label they had used was a very nice, elegant label, large label, firm name written nicely, and it was larger than most labels I had seen. And I cloned that. I said, you know what we'll do whenever we send out stuff, we're going to use this large label. And I've used it all the companies from then till now. Okay, so that's an example of I've continued to look for small things, big things that I can clone. So when you're looking at this enduring competitive advantage, there are two facets to it. One facet is that you come up with something like our cable guy, where he's coming up with cable lengths and you're just trying to be 3 months ahead of the rest of the pack. And he has some sort of advantage for some time. But also what you need to do in parallel with that is build advantage one tiny piece at a time. So every little best practice or every little thing that you see, if you incorporate, over time, it will expand into something meaningful. And it's just small pieces. Like, for example, anytime we hire employees in any of my firms or even in India, when we hire at Dakshina, we run a test, which a company in New Jersey came up with. It's called Caliper. And it basically gives you a personality profile on the person. It also has a facet of it, which is an IQ test oriented, so we can also see how smart they are. But that company basically gets a job description from us. So if it's a sales job, they know what that means. If it's an administrative job, if it's a job with high attention to detail, etc. And they overlay that with the personality profile. And they basically give us a report, which tells us, they come up with 3 rankings, which is matched, person is matched to the job, or matched reservations, or don't go there. Okay. And what I've learned is that if they ever say don't go there, don't worry about how much you like the person, don't hire the person. Okay. Now that testing costs us about $400 each time we do that. And one of the most expensive things that can happen to a company is bad hires. Very expensive if you have bad hires. And so I don't even hire interns without running through the test. In fact, I got an email last night from our group in India, and they were saying that one of our alums, they wanted to hire him for 3 months. He's free for 3 months. It's only 15,000 rupees a month, 45,000 rupees over 3 months. That's about $800 or so. My suggestion to them was run Caliper. Even though it's a 50% overhead of what we're going to pay, we just don't want to deal with 3 months of someone who's a misfit. And you can't tell that in an interview. You mentioned this to me many years ago, and I incorporated this. Many times I mention it to so many CEOs I meet, they don't incorporate because the cloning gene is missing, sorry to say. So cloning has many facets to it. I continuously look for things that other businesses, other companies are doing, which I like. And I try to see, is there something that I can incorporate? My entire livelihood now is based on cloning. Pabrai Funds was cloned from the Buffett partnerships. And again, what happened to the Buffett partnerships? Just to tell you how amazing and bewildering the world is, the most successful set of hedge funds ever run in the history of hedge funds from 1956 to 1969. Really well run, everything else. And then this massive industry takes place. And then from 1969, when Buffett shut the hedge fund, to 1999, when I was thinking of cloning him, 30 years. 30 years in a capitalist society where everyone is clearly aware of what he did and what the results were and all that, I could find nobody who cloned that model. This is incredible. It's an amazing model. And so I said, okay, I understand why no one cloned it, because Tom Peters said that and I've seen it. So I said, I will clone it. I was put on this earth to clone it. And we cloned it. And my family has a significantly higher net worth because I did that. God bless cloning. Now I'm in the process of buying an insurance company. Why am I buying an insurance company? because that's the model Berkshire Hathaway used. I don't need to come up with ideas on my own. I can just clone those ideas. So it works. So I think that's cloning is very important. Another thing I wanted to talk about is that this aspect of copying best ideas from anywhere you find them. So when I was growing up in Mumbai in the 70s, you really didn't get any junk mail, right? In India, there was no such thing as junk mail at the time. If you got a letter which was handwritten or something, it was really cared about you and wrote this letter. And I remember that in a typical day, we'd get 2 or 3 letters, a bill and something else, nothing much. But every year at Diwali time, there would be a card that would show up. And this card would be from this jeweler in New Delhi. We were living in Mumbai. So this jeweler in New Delhi was sending us this card, and it was Multani Jewelers. I never heard of these people. And every year it was the same kind of card. It was signed by these 2 or 3 brothers. And so I think when I was 10 or 11 years old, I asked my parents, who are these people? Who are these Multani Jewelers? And so they said, oh, when we got married, we bought our wedding jewelry from there. So what the thought about that, I said, the wedding took place and now there's going to be no transaction for a while. This card keeps coming. And what took me a while to understand is that what they were doing was very smart. First of all, in India, they hardly had any junk mail. So if someone sends a card like that to you, it has value. And I clearly noticed it. And the second is that these transactions, when you have these weddings and such, for the jeweler is a massive transaction, right? So a given family will really show up at the jeweler every 15 or 20 or 25 years for a major purchase. And then they'll be going dormant for another 10, 15 years. So what you really have to do is you have to build a brand so they think of you, right? And so I said, wow, this is very good. These guys are basically just sending this 1 rupee card, and over 20 years is 20 rupees, and you feel good about them, right? And I cloned that. And so what I did is, right from the time I started running my first business, we send greeting cards. And then I realized some place where someone had written that humans love to look at other humans. And actually what humans love the most is to look at themselves. Okay? And in fact, they did this in Facebook. They've actually done the analysis. The most that people look at is their own pictures. Okay, that is the number one thing. Who looks at their pictures the most in Facebook? Raise your hand. Not this crowd. Come on. Okay, so people love to look at their own pictures. But if they can't look at their own pictures, they want to look at other people's pictures. Okay? And you see this in a baby. Baby is 9 months old, 8 months old. If you make eye contact with the baby, it'll make eye contact with you. Babies are programmed to look at other people. Okay? They love to look at people. So humans love to look at other humans. So I used to first clone Multani Jewelers just by sending a Christmas card with some Christmas tree on the cover, something like that. Then I read this thing about humans look at other humans. I said, no, we'll change it to a family picture. And then this is before it became in vogue to send family pictures. And then we started doing that. And in the meantime, what has happened is that people have moved from sending cards out to doing it online. But that's stupid, because online really doesn't have the same impacts. And so the good news is US Postal Service mail volumes are going down. And the amount I use the US Postal Service just keeps going up. Okay, because now fewer cards show up at people's doorsteps. And especially if they have pictures in them, they like to look at those pictures. You get my card, D? Do you like to look at it? All right, there you go. All right, thank you. Thank you for the plug. All right. All right, that's good. Okay, there you go. See, I haven't even sent it to you. Maybe we'll add you to the list. All right, okay. So anyway, the pictures, for example, as people stop sending things physically, I'm just increasing that. So one of the things I found is that since I don't like to spend a lot of time meeting humans, interacting with them, all the sales stuff and all that, I created back-end stuff that is going to be robust. So the greeting cards is one piece of that, right? Another piece of that is there's this book by, what's the name of the author, the guy who wrote Influence? What's the name of the guy? Yeah, Cialdini, Robert Cialdini. It's a great book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And I've gotten to know Robert since then, great guy. So Cialdini basically said that he gave a story, and it's a true story, and this was before 9/11. When you arrived at the flight, you used to be able to go right up to the gate to meet someone, right? Before all hell broke loose and they stopped doing all that. So he was talking about in the 70s, for example, in California, there'd be the Moonies at the airports in the Hare Krishna robes and all that. And they'd be looking, as people are coming off an airplane, at this kind of well-dressed businessman. Okay, and when they found a well-dressed businessman come off the plane, the Moonie would attach himself to the businessman and start walking with him and say, "Sir, isn't it a beautiful day? Isn't it a wonderful day? This is such a nice sunny day. I want you to have this flower." And the businessman, he has no interest in the Moonie. He has no interest in the flower, none of that. Okay, he's just trying to get away from the guy, but the guy is keeping up with him, right? And so he keeps saying, "Sir, I just want to have the flower. I'm not asking for anything. I just like you. I like the day. I want to give a fellow human a flower." Once in a while, every 8th or 10th guy will take the flower just to get rid of the guy. And the moment he takes the flower, what happens is now you've created an obligation. Okay, because you took something from me. So clearly there's an obligation. So usually he'll reach into his pocket, pull out a couple of dollars, give it to the guy. And then first dumpster, there goes the flower. And the Moonie is about 10 steps behind picking up the flower. As soon as it's dumped, go for the next victim. Okay? And Cialdini said that humans basically, and this is probably going back into our genetic history. I don't know, Tony, how much time do we have? Are we okay? Okay, fine. Just when we have about 20, 25 minutes, maybe then we can open up in case people want to have questions. But anyway, so what Cialdini said is that if you go back into human evolutionary history, people go hunting, and let's say I go hunting, I bring down this big beast, okay, and there's no refrigeration. So how do I store the meat that my family is not going to eat? The way I store it in my neighbor's belly, okay? So I come back with a big beast, invite everybody to say, "Hey, guys, party time." Okay, feed everybody, okay, because there's nothing else I can do because it's going to spoil otherwise, right? So you feed everyone, and what happens is we've been built to remember, hey, Joe fed me really well 3 weeks ago, and when I bring down the big beast, I'm going to call Joe. But the reciprocation memory that we have as humans is somewhat flawed. It does not have a calibration engine. So if I do you a favor, all that you're able to remember is that I did you a favor, you feel good about me, and that's about the end of it. You really are not able to calibrate the degree of the flavor and say, "Oh, he did this for me, so I can do this exact thing for you." And of course, the shyster salesmen of the world have learned how to take advantage of that. So one of the things I used Cialdini's, this distortion with reciprocation, when I got Pabrai funds going, was that anytime we sent a potential investor a package, people requested a package, we could send everything as a PDF. We never sent anything as a PDF. We sent a physical package, okay? And the physical package had a very nice $50 cross pen in it. And now the guy got the flower at 100% hit rate. Unlike the Moonie, who may have had a 10% hit rate. He didn't ask for the pen, but the pen arrived in the mailbox. And maybe 1 in 200 people would actually go to the trouble of returning the pen for me, okay? They're saying that I really don't want this obligation thing going on. Here's your pen back. Returning the pen is not as easy as dealing with the Moonie because you got to do all kinds of heuristics to send that pen back. But 99% or more have kept the pen. And some portion of them invest in Pabrai funds. But the ones who don't invest, what happens is, number one, they feel good about Mohnish, right? Because they have a nice pen. So the brain says he's a good guy, right? And number two, they feel some kind of obligation, right? And the obligation is very simple. I give you a $50 pen, you can send $1 million wire. And we're even, because I did you a favor, and then you did me a favor, and we shared our meat. It's all fine, right? And that works, right? And we've sent a lot of cross pens out, and that works out fine. So what I'm trying to say is that, you can pick up ideas from anywhere. When you read the book, Origin and Evolution of New Businesses, pick up lots of ideas from there. That's good. You can pick them up anywhere. I used to read Inc. magazine. I haven't read Inc. magazine in a while, but every issue I'd look through very carefully to find small things that other entrepreneurs, other businesses were doing that I could incorporate. And it's really that these smaller things that you put together, that as you total them up, they end up becoming significant in totality. So I would say that that's some of the things I wanted to share with you. Basically, that number one, don't try to sell anything that you wouldn't buy yourself. Like I said, and the sales side, like I said, if your marketing engines are strong, we didn't go a lot into sales, but if the marketing engine is strong, you don't really need a strong sales engine. And some of the things I've always kept in mind about sales is that it used to be that if you were going to meet a customer who was out of town, let's say you're going to fly, you're selling some high-end product, you're going to fly to meet somebody. It used to be probably 20 years ago that was at least $1,000 cost between flights and everything else. It might be similar or more now, but then there's a huge time sink as well. It blows a day or two of your time. So even if you go to meet someone in town, if I went to even Cerritos or someplace to meet someone, it is going to blow about half my day. Between the planning for it and going and meeting and coming back, it's 3-4 hours at a minimum gone. And that is a very high price to pay, in my opinion, for a sales call. And so first of all, what I've done for myself is, one is, I don't like to do things that I don't like to do. And so if this thing is not going to be intellectually stimulating or something, I'd rather not go make the sales call. And so what I said is, we can set it up so that the back end is powerful enough that you eliminate that front end requirement. And like I said, like for example, this time we raised this capital, I only made one visit to a person who was in Irvine, to their office, mainly because I actually wanted to see his office. He'd been telling me to come and see it for a while, and that was pretty quick, 15-minute commutes both ways and such, so pretty easy, but never offered to go meet anyone else. And I did a lot of phone calls, but those are much less costly. So I would just say that when you're trying to do your pitches and different things like that, you want to be cognizant of the fact that anytime you're doing live meetings, it's incredibly expensive. And the second is that if the marketing message is not strong and buttoned down, that live meeting is not going to be very fruitful. So you're better off having a much stronger message where you can get things done the Amazon way, where there's not even a phone number you can call, all digital. So that's great. But with that, maybe if you have questions or comments, and we'll go till whenever Tony tells me we got to. So.
I was watching, fascinated myself. Yeah.
We can hand these out. These are just a list of books I'd mentioned.
So yeah, sure. Let's take a few questions, and I'm sure by the end of the evening, Mohnish will still be here. You had a question up in the back. Yes. Yes.
I wanted to talk to you about what you mentioned about cloning. Human nature, common sense tells us, and it's been proven in a lot of books, that whenever you clone something, you're always going to be behind the curve. If you want to start something, let's say copy Coca-Cola, they'll always be ahead of you, whether it's in price, advantage in economies. Don't get me wrong, it's been successful, like Samsung, they've taken over Apple's iPhone, copied it. All American car industries are now taken over by Japanese and Koreans. But most of them, anything I've read in books, is you're always going to be behind.
Well, I would say that some of the most. Okay, so let me just repeat the question for the benefit of the video. Your question is that cloning, you're behind the 8 ball, you're basically copying someone, and so how can you really gain an advantage? Yeah, unless you leapfrog. So let's actually look at some real world cases. Some of the largest companies on the planet are clone businesses. Microsoft is a clone business. They have spent tens of billions of dollars, probably spending tens of billions of dollars every year. And the only things that make money are Office. So Word is cloned from WordPerfect. Excel is cloned from Lotus. And there's some money from Quicken, not even that good. And Bing, the full form of Bing is, but it's not Google. So Bing is cloning Google, and it just goes on and on. And they're not even a good cloner. It takes about 5, 6, 7 versions for them to get it right. And still they built a great business. If you look at someone like Walmart, Sam Walton, the cloner, he spent an incredible amount of time in his competitor stores. And in fact, if you read his autobiography, Made in America, it will just show you that for the first 20 years of Walmart's existence, Walmart had no new ideas. The only thing that they did different was they went into small towns, but they pretty much copied the Sears and Kmart model. So they had a slight tweak to the other models. Coca-Cola, look at Pepsi, right? Highly successful, they cloned it. So actually, I think cloning is very powerful because there is room for more than one. And what is actually going to end up happening is that even if you clone something, in the end, you're going to put your stamp on it. And when you put your stamp on it, it is that small bit that's slightly off that makes it unique. So when Walmart, for example, cloned Sears, the piece that Walmart brought in is an incredible discipline on costs. If they would be going for a trip to New York, 4 of them are staying in the same hotel room. No one at Walmart ever flies anything but coach. If they're using a private plane, which now they do, they cannot use it unless the plane's full. So they have all these rules about the way they run their thing, incredible cost discipline, which Sears and Kmart did not have. So what is going to happen is if you start with cloning, what you're going to end up with is going to be cloning with your own aspect of nuance to it, which is going to give you an advantage. I can say Pabrai funds cloned Buffett. First of all, there's only one Warren Buffett. But there's many aspects of what I did, probably when you drill down, is different from the way Buffett did it. And so it's going to end up being different. So I would say that people will say that this will not work because it already exists, but many versions of the same thing can make it. Yeah.
Many years ago, you were bidding on auction to have a lunch with Warren Buffett, and you won that auction. You went, had a lunch with him. What can you tell us from that experience? What did you learn? What was your impression from that?
Sure. Yeah, I had lunch with Buffett in 2008, and my family was with me, my wife and daughters, which was a lot of fun, and one of my friends as well. And it was a great experience, actually. We spent about 3 hours having it. In fact, Warren told us when we started that the lunch could go on for as long as we wanted. There was no time limit. We could ask him anything. And within about 15 minutes of us starting to talk to him, you felt like you were talking to your grandfather. He made sure that you didn't think you were talking to Warren Buffett. We covered many different subjects. I think many of the things we covered are probably in the public domain. If you read about Buffett, it'll come up. But what I found very helpful, first of all, my interest in doing the lunch was really to pay a Guru Dakshina. I've been cloning left and center, making all this money. How do I thank him? There was a lunch, there was a way to thank him. So I told him right up front, I'm just very grateful for what you did, very thankful for you and all of that. So that's what I wanted to really cover. But one of the things that was helpful during the lunch is it calibrated for me what were things that were very important to Warren, the core principles that are front and center. For example, one of the first things he mentioned is that there are 2 ways you can live your life. He says you can live your life by what he called an inner scorecard, which is you judge internally how well you're doing at something. And the other way you can live your life is by an outer scorecard, which is you look at the world and the way they think about you is the way you judge yourself. And he said the correct way to live your life is with an inner scorecard. So he went ahead and said, would you prefer to be the best lover in the world, but known as the worst? Or would you prefer to be the worst lover in the world, but known as the best? And so he said, if you know how to answer that question, you've got it made. And so first of all, I think that the inner scorecard versus outer scorecard is an incredibly important mental model to keep in mind, is always try to do things that you think at the core are the right thing to do, regardless whether the world agrees with you or not. Very few humans are willing to do that. People care about what the world thinks. Warren actually does not care what the world thinks. And if you look at many aspects of his life, he had a wife and he had a mistress at the same time. And the wife approved of the mistress. In fact, the wife gave him the mistress. Okay? And no one raises an eyebrow about it. And he never cared about what the world thought about it. And someone once asked him about this whole triangular arrangement. And his perspective, his answer was, there are 3 people affected by it, none of whom have a problem with it. Okay, so that's ultimate in a scorecard. Doesn't really care about what the world says. But go ahead.
So you mentioned that listen closely to the customer and they will tell you what to do. But you also said don't drive the customer.
In the early days, yeah. So the question is, I'm saying that listen to your customers, then I'm also saying don't meet them. I would say that, let me preface that. In the early days, please spend incredible amounts of time with your customers.
Everything is evolving, right? What problem customers may have now may not have tomorrow. So you have to keep, especially in our line of business, keep, marketing engine may not be there, you have to.
Right. I would say that's a very valid point. So the question is that we may not be able to picking up market movements or signals if we are sitting in our ivory tower and not meeting anyone. My perspective is that you can actually pick up data from multiple sources. And I feel the worst possible way to pick up data, the least efficient channel to pick up data, is talking to another human. That is the worst way to educate yourself, in my opinion. The best way to educate yourself is read a book. Okay, so from my point of view, I think in terms of density of knowledge going into your brain, reading is the best way to do that. The lowest level of doing that is meeting someone, because all the banter and everything else going on, and then the sales and all of that, at the end of the day, there's very little essence that comes out. So I would say early days, yeah, absolutely max time. Subsequently, you have to figure out a way where you're bringing in data that is important so you don't miss market signals. But I would say a lot of that you would do much better by being a voracious reader versus being a voracious meter of people. So reading is probably get you much further along on that curve. Yeah. Sorry, you can keep sitting.
I would like to have your opinion. I got one product which is a patented product. It has to do with what you call toothpaste, mouthwash, whitening gel. And we come out with the product and ready to go to the market. And some advisor says, unless you perfect it, don't go to market. So the question is, by the time you are ready, there is always something new and new. So what is your take on that one? If you wait forever, it's just taking a lot of time.
So the question is, you mentioned that you have a patented product, and advisors say that don't go to market unless it's absolutely perfect, but that's a moving target. Well, have a seat. So my answer is that there are 100 ways that things can be successful. So you can be like Steve Jobs, and you can wait till things are absolutely perfect and just keep working on them till you think you're satisfied, and that works. Or you can be like Bill Gates, and send everything half-baked to the market, and that worked also. So the nature of capitalism is that you don't have one particular way that is probably going to be the only way it works. My personal bias would be to put out something that's as close to perfection as possible, so you yourself feel good about it. But I would say this is a gut call. Look at it, at what point do you feel it's an incredible product? And you can go out and you can come out with version 2.0 after a year or something. But if you feel it's there and it's incredible, go for it. But I think if you have reservations, then I would say keep it in the lab for a little longer. But there are multiple ways to skin the cat.
Isn't it true, as you said, if you feel good about using it yourself,
Absolutely.
take it out.
Absolutely.
That's what you have to do, right?
That's the key. You have to love it, yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to take you back to where I wanted to hear from you is the mental models. When you pick stocks, what mental models do you use? Because you articulated Munger in so many times, and I've been eager to hear from you. What did you learn about mental models from them?
Okay, sure. How much time do we have, Tony? We have time. Okay, good. All right. So the question is on mental models and how do you pick stocks and how do I pick stocks and so on. Let me answer your question the following way. So let's say that you have 80 IQ and you come to me and say, look, I'm not very smart, but I want to do the best I can in the market. So how should I go about managing my portfolio? So I say 80 IQ, we can work with an 80 IQ. Buy an index fund. Buy the S&P 500 index, dollar cost average, every paycheck, maybe 15%. Over a lifetime, you're going to wake up at 70 and be rich. 7 figures for sure. Now you say to me that I have a 90 IQ. I'm much smarter than the 80 IQ guy. Can I do better? And I would say to you, of course, we have more to work with. 90 IQ, we can definitely do better. Buy Berkshire Hathaway. Okay, so probably you'll beat the S&P 500 index better. Again, dollar cost average, and put some money from every paycheck and you're done. Then the 100 IQ guy comes to me and say, look, I'm better than these guys. I'm 100 IQ. Can I do better than that? I say 100 IQ, of course we can work with that and we can do some more things with that. So of course we can do better. There were these two professors, business school professors, one was at Ohio State and one was at the University of Nevada, and they did a study over 30 years, I think 1976 to 2006. And they studied that if you bought a stock that Warren Buffett bought, and you bought it after it was publicly known that he had bought it, and you bought it on the last day of the month that it was publicly known that he had bought it, and you found the worst broker on the planet who charged you the highest price on the last day of the month to give you that stock, and you bought it at that high price on the last day, and you sold it when Buffett started to sell, again publicly known, again on the last day of the month, found the worst broker, sold it at the lowest price on the last day of the month, you beat the S&P over 30 years by 11.5% a year. Okay, you did 21.5% annualized if you followed that approach. Okay, now if you are beating the S&P 500 by 3 percentage points a year, you're like 1 in 200. As you get to 5 percentage points, 7 percentage points, 10 percentage points outperformance, it's 1 in thousands. So that is incredible performance for having to work 15 minutes a month. Because whole month you can be in Goa or Aspen or wherever enjoying life. Then last day of the month you come back and say, Google, did Buffett do anything this month? Any disclosure, anything happen? Google will tell you if anything happened. Then you say, oh, he bought IBM. Okay, worst broker, give me the high price today for IBM. Okay, and then go back to your skiing activities, what else you're doing till the next month. Okay, now let's say someone has 110 IQ and says to me, look, I'm better than these other guys. I'm 110 IQ. Can I do better than that? And it's not easy to do better than 11.5% a year. But then I would say do something like what I do, which is be a shameless cloner. There are two ways you can do bowling if you go to a bowling alley, right? One is you can bowl with bumpers, and the other is you can bowl without bumpers, right? You can put the thing so you have no gutter balls, or you can have gutter balls all the time. So if I told you that what matters is the score at the end, not whether you use bumpers or not, would you prefer to bowl with bumpers or without bumpers? With bumpers? Is it more fun to bowl with bumpers? Yes, the score is going to be higher. I love bowling with bumpers. So if you're one of the I don't want to bowl with bumpers guy, then you're also the kind of guy who probably doesn't want to clone. Okay. So bowling with bumpers is fantastic. Always bowl with bumpers. Turn those bumpers on. Okay. So anyway, so when you bowl with bumpers, which is what I'm doing if you look at Pabrai Fund's portfolio, almost the entire portfolio is stock picks by some other great investor. I have no original ideas. Okay. So I just look at what some other smart person is doing, seeing if I can understand what they've done, and then buy the same thing. And the incredible nature of this wonderful country is I get paid for doing that. Okay, and get paid really well to do that. But don't tell my investors. Okay, they think I'm actually working hard. Are we recording this? So basically, bowl with bumpers. So I would say that you can go pretty far along as an investor just by doing mindless clothing. In fact, someone just set up an ETF, right? Someone set up an ETF for the first time, which is a cloning ETF. All this time I was talking that there's no fund that does cloning. Some ETFs, I don't know what it's called. Have you looked at it? Yeah, so there's a cloning ETF. Apparently it has great performance. It's looking at all these, I don't know what it'll do in the future. Disclaimer, no idea. That might be a good place to start. Or you could do just what those two professors said, just 15 minutes a month. And that's it. So I'm sorry to disappoint you. Between us girls, I have one share. So I'm legal to go to the meeting.
The reason I was asking you is whether you follow the
Buffett and one with hard process? Or you just
There have been times in the past where I've had significant holdings of Berkshire. So the question was how much Berkshire do I own? And I own one share. But yeah, at times when it has been cheaper, I've bought more of it. I think owning Berkshire is a great choice and simple choice. You have no taxes to be paid or any of that till you sell. It's great. But some folks may think they can do better than that.
But thank you so much. That was an incredible talk. So really excited you all could come, and if you don't mind staying back.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Minutes. So it's great to